Hi, dear friends, cultural creatives, and seekers everywhere. Bruce back with a very interesting story today. A story about the immune system. Yes, I know every day with COVID you hear about the immune system this, the immune system that. Well, what is the immune system? I mean, if I ask you what the digestive system is, you'd probably say, yes, oh yeah, there's the mouth and the esophagus and the stomach and the intestines. You get all those pieces. I say, what is the immune system? Well, generally it's something that protects me. From what? From things that get inside your body. And I said, well, why should things want to get inside my body in the first place? Let's just set up a scenario. You're out there in the world, and I drop you off in the wilderness, and I say, okay, survive. And one of the things you have to do is start finding food. And you're going to spend all your time, maybe find nothing, and you're going to be looking for food. And here's an alternative vision. I drop you out in an eat-all-you-can buffet. Well, you don't have to worry about food. It's being served to you all the time. What does this have to do with the immune system? And I go like this. Bacteria, parasites that live out in the environment have to struggle for their survival to find food. But underneath your skin, the tissues inside your body are flush with fluid from the blood. And in that fluid are all the nutrients and elements necessary for growth. So if a bacteria could find itself inside to your body, it would be sitting pretty. All it'd have to do is just sit there, and food would be constantly delivered from an individual's circulatory system. So the idea is, well, yeah, then obviously this is a nice environment that invasive organisms would like to find themselves in because it's like free food, well, you know, no probs. So, okay, so what does this mean? It says, well, then we have to have a defense system. Because if invasive organisms get in there, not only will they utilize the food we make, but they could create a toxic waste environment that could actually undermine our health. So we can't afford to have invasive organisms come into us and take over. And the immune system's job is an internal protection system, as opposed to, for example, the adrenal system, fight or flight, which protects you from threats on the outside. Immune system protects you from threats on the inside. So I said, well, how does it work? Well, the immune system is an intelligent system. Because what is the function of the immune system? To go out into the world of their body and look for things that are new, that came in, and then not only recognize them, but learn about them so that they could create antibodies, for example, to effectively knock them out. So the immune system's character is learning and memory. I go, wow, what a coincidence. This is the character of the nervous system. Point. The immune system is an extension of the nervous system, learning and memory about the environment in which you live. So I said, well, how does it work? Well, I say that there are organisms that prefer to find the interior of our body as a place to live because it's so much easier for them just to sit there and live off of your energy and your nourishment. So the old story is, oh, the immune system protects self, my body, against invading organisms as everything else is called not self. Well, I go, that's a crude insight, but it's not anywhere near accurate for a simple reason. The immune system identifies things that get into the body that cause disruption of the system. And its job is to identify them, mark them, and eliminate them. And I go, but there are many organisms that live with us that are part of us. It's called the microbiome. Thousands of species of organisms, bacteria and parasites living with us. I say, the immune system doesn't attack them. The reason is this. They support our viability. They support who we are. So self versus not self, that's not the discriminating factor of the immune system. Factor of the immune system is anything that's disruptive to the system. Well, guess what? That not only includes organisms that come from the outside, but even our own cells, if they go rogue, like go into a cancer state, the immune system's job is to eliminate them. So basically, the function of the immune system is to keep harmony in the system. Any organism that comes in that disrupts harmony, function of the immune system, eliminate it. There's an intelligence to it. And it's not self versus not self. It's versus anything that brings harmony versus anything that disturbs harmony in the system. That's the focus of the immune system. The immune system represents a whole population and community of cells inside the body. But here's an interesting fact. The most important component of the immune system isn't even the immune system. The body is protected by a layer of skin. Skin represents an organization of cells forming like a membrane, a layer. It's called epithelium. Every opening of the body is lined by epithelium. So I say, yes, the throat has an epithelium as you go in, okay? The nose has an epithelium. The ears have an epithelium. The respiratory, the digestive system, the excretory, the reproductive system. Point is very simple. Every system that's connected to the outside of the body has a protective layer of epithelium as a border to prevent infection into the system. The skin, for example, is a barrier that prevents things from attacking you. So here's the important part. The skin, and now we know there's another layer called the microbiome, which consists of bacteria and elements like that, are two layers, microbiome on top of the epithelium, and underneath is the inside of the body. These two layers aren't part, by definition, of the immune system, but they represent the most important part of the immune system because with these two barriers, they eliminate 99.99% of any infective agent. It doesn't even get past those barriers. The immune system that we talk about with the cellular involvement is if the invasive organism gets under the barrier. Now it's inside an environment, and the function of the policing of that environment is due to the immune system. So I said, well, how can I explain it to you in a very simple way? So I say, here's a picture. Let's start off with this. Here's an aquarium. There's fish in the aquarium, there's water in the aquarium, and there's a border all the way around the aquarium that contains the water and the fish. Well, in addition to that, if you have an aquarium, guess what? You have to filter the water. So you put in a pump that takes water out, filters it, and then puts it back into the system. So now we have a pump. And now a very important aspect of that pump, which represents the circulatory system, is that I could add nutrients to that pump. So as it's pumping the fluid through the body, it's also pumping nutrients throughout the body. So I say, cool. So here's our picture of the aquarium. The pump is working. Food elements are coming out with the fluid, and this draws the fish to the pump, the vascular system, the equivalent. I go, so why is this relevant? I said, well, it's a circulatory system, filtering the water, adding the water back in, and then taking the water out and filtering again. And then I say, well, there's one little component we have to add to that. And I say, what is it? And I say, when the fluid is removed from the blood by pressure, blood pressure, what happens is large blood vessels like an artery shrink down to a small blood vessel like a capillary. So you have a large amount of fluid coming in and then a little tiny vessel to carry all that fluid out. Well, that means there's a pressure on this side of the small vessel, blood pressure. And I say, what does that mean? Well, then as the fluid is being pushed through the capillary, which is lined by epithelial cells, that the fluid pressure causes the fluid in the blood, which we call lymph, to leak out between the cells lining the blood vessel. So in a state of nourishment, the blood that's coming to the area of the body, carrying red cells, which have oxygen in them, and fluid, the serum in the blood, which has all the building blocks, the nutrients and hormones and growth factors, is carried in the fluid. In a conventional situation, blood pressure causes that fluid to leak out. That fluid carrying nutrition nourishes the cells. And at the other end of the capillary where it joins the vein, a process called osmosis, which drives the fluid from the outside back into the capillary, helps return the fluid that came out at the front of the capillary to come back in at the end. Now there's only one problem. More fluid is coming out at the front of the capillary than is going back in at the other end of the capillary. The point is, then the blood is continually putting more fluid into the body than is being taken back into the blood again. So I said, wow, well, you can't live very long like that because eventually then all the blood fluid would be leaked out and you wouldn't have any blood fluid in your circulatory system. Point is very simple. At this point, we need to return the extra fluid. I say, there's the equivalent of a floor drain, a drain in the tissue. All it does is collect the extra fluid out of the tissue, bring it through a pipe, and carry it back filter it, and then drop it back into the heart so that we can replace the fluid that was coming out. Okay, so this means capillaries are nourishing. They don't let red cells out. They let the oxygen out. They let the nutrition dissolved in the fluid out. So the blood cells don't come out. They just keep moving down the capillary, but pressure pushes the fluid out, nourishing the cells. Significance now is this, is that this fluid that comes out fills the spaces around the cells. The body isn't solid cells. The body is like a spongy network inside with matrix, they call it, with just like a sponge with cavities in it. And the fluid coming out of the blood vessels goes through the sponge. And cells are embedded in the sponge. So as the fluid is going through the sponge, the cells can use the nutrients and oxygen in that fluid. So this is how the cells get nourished. Well, the problem for the immune system is this. This is a very rich environment for invasive organisms. If a bacteria could get into that body, it would be nourished by your effort to eat and create the building blocks of life. So you would be feeding an invasive population. So the job of the immune system is a whole series of cells that travel through the body. And what do they look for? Anything that's creating a disturbance from homeostasis. And the immune system's job then is to eliminate those things, whether it's something foreign that came in or even one of your own cells that has gone rogue. Okay, so that's the function of the immune system. And I said, well, how does it work? I said, well, look, let's go back to the aquarium story right now. And the cells are represented by the fish. The matrix where the fluid is represented by the fluid in the aquarium, okay? The pump that has been circulating the fluid is the equivalent of the circulatory system, heart and blood vessels. I say, so what's relevant? I say, now take a perspective from an invasive organism. An invasive organism can end up in either of three different places, just as we've illustrated. It could go into the fluid part in the matrix and just sit there and take all the nutrients out of the fluid. Or an organism like a bacterium can infect a cell and live inside the cell. Well, guess what? Now it's protected from the immune system because it's not out in the matrix. It can't be seen by the immune system, but it's inside a cell, taking over the function of that cell and living off of that cell. And a third place for an infection is not only did it come into the fluid, but it got picked up by the vascular system, the circulatory system. I say, why is that relevant? Well, that's the richest source of nutrients of all, and it also goes through the entire body. So if an invasive organism is in the blood, it can be distributed anywhere throughout the body and take over. This process is called sepsis. This is the most disturbing form of inflammation because you're feeding everything with the purest nutrients in the blood and giving an opportunity to be distributed throughout the entire body. So I say, well, then we have to deal with these infections. And the two primary infection sites are either in the matrix where the fluid is or inside the cells. There are two main cell types in the immune system that deal with this. There's a whole community, but two main characters that we talk about. The lymphocytes are the scuba divers that come into this matrix, one set T cells, examining the health of the body cells as to whether they're healthy or infected. One of them is called a B cell, which means bone marrow derived cell, a cell that evolved in the bone marrow, in the red bone marrow, which is generating blood cells. It generates these white cells called B lymphocytes. What's their function? The function of a B lymphocyte is to go through the matrix and identify anything that doesn't belong there by glomming onto it with receptors. And then this invasive thing, which we collectively call an antigen, the B cell has a surface receptor that could plug into that antigen, like a lock and key. And if it can do that, then that B cell is stimulated to make more of these receptors, but release them free. So they're floating in solution. So wherever that target was, the free-floating antibodies, they're called, can attach to the target, mark that target for destruction, and other cells like macrophages will take the marked structures with antibodies and devour them and break them down and protect you. So yes, antibodies are created by B cells by recognizing a foreign antigen, modifying the receptor so that it becomes a perfect fit for that antigen, and then reproducing those receptors but releasing them out into the fluid, in the blood, serum, and in the lymph. And these antibodies floating around, if they ever encounter the antigen that precipitated them, those antibodies will bind to it, mark it for self-destruction. And that's how we eliminate it. But now we're left with the last part, and that is what? What if the infective agent is inside the cell? Antibodies can't get inside the cell. So how do I deal with an infection inside of a cell? I said a second group of immune cells are called T lymphocytes. And that stands for thymus-derived lymphocytes. I said, what's their function? Well, these lymphocytes go around and can read the health of any cell in your system by looking at the surface of that cell. Is it a healthy cell or is it an infected cell? Well, the T lymphocyte can distinguish between them. And when it finds an infected cell, the T lymphocyte cell itself kills the infected cell, which then wipes out the infection. So I have two main cells that part of the immune system. B cells, which release antibodies which float through the system, marking invasive organisms and marking them to be eliminated. Or T cells, which are capable of traveling among all the cells and testing their surfaces to see, are these cells infected? And then the job is to eliminate an infected cell using the T cell to actually kill the infected cell. So we have T and B cells running through our body with an intelligence. Their targets were identified. And when a target is identified, for example, by a B cell, it causes the B cell to reproduce and create lots of versions to do what? Make lots of antibodies to go through the system and protect us. And then there are memory B cells and memory T cells. After the infection is gone, these memory cells hold on to the history of what happened. And if that invasive organism ever shows up again, instantly the cells will be prepared to fight that. And that's called immunological memory. The immune system's job is to move through the biology of the body, through the matrix where the fluids are, or by identifying the individual cells comprising the body, read for the expression of an infection, and then identify the antigen causing an infection, and then create a complement, be it an antibody or a surface receptor on a T cell, that when recognizing the foreign element will mark it and then kill it and protect us. And this is the function of the immune system. And the primary part of the immune system isn't even the T and the B cell. The primary part is not even part of the immune system. It's the barrier that prevents 99.99% of infective agents from coming in. So I go, okay, let's take the story and put it in today's context of the COVID inflammation. I say, so how does it work? A COVID is a virus. What's a virus? A virus is a device that carries memory that plugs into a cell and transfers the memory into the cell, and the transferred memory takes over the function of the cell. So a virus redirects the function of your cells to do what? Make more viruses. So a virus infects a cell, and then the cell creates more viruses. And when the cell has so many viruses in it, the cell breaks down, dies, releases the new viruses, which then go on and infect new cells, and it's a perpetuation machine. I say, so let's understand COVID, the mechanism, because it's very important at this time. Number one, the COVID virus is called a cold virus. I say, what does cold have to do with it? And the answer is this. When the virus injects its information into the cell, that reproduction of the virus occurs at a temperature lower than body temperature, 98.6 Fahrenheit, for example. Viruses in the cold version don't actually develop very quickly at body temperature. They develop at colder than body temperature. I say, where in the body is the temperature colder? I go, the respiratory system, because the respiratory system is taking cold air from the outside, bringing it into the lungs, and having to warm it up to body temperature so it doesn't shock the system. But that means the air that's coming into the respiratory system is colder than 98.6 degrees. Relevance? If the virus coming in that air hits the surface cells in the respiratory tract, they'll infect them and they'll be able to grow, and especially in the wintertime because the air is even colder when it's coming in, the cold air dropping body temperature down to an adequate temperature for reproducing the viruses. So viruses grow like this in the cold. Okay? Well, imagine you just breathe in a COVID virus. And I say, where's it going to go? It's going to go down the respiratory tract. And I say, what's its function? The virus, like a memory stick, plugs into respiratory lining cells, the epithelium, the barrier that was protecting you. Of all the barriers protecting the body from outside influences, the thinnest of all barriers is the respiratory tract. And the reason why it's so thin, what's the function? It's to allow oxygen to move from the environment into the red cells and allow carbon dioxide in the red cells to be released by going back into the air again. So in the lung are these structures like balloons called alveoli. And alveoli are like balloons that blow up when you breathe and contract when you exhale. And so every time you breathe, you can bring in bacteria and viruses such as the COVID. So you breathing, the COVID virus comes down the throat. It's a colder temperature than the rest of the body. The COVID virus has a plug that matches the barrier of the alveolus. And I say, so what does it do? Well, it invades the lining of the respiratory tract. Then what? Well, it proliferates. Then what? It causes the lining cell to break down. Well, if the lining cell breaks down, there's a secondary consequence. That is, now the outside environment is no longer being walled off by an epithelium. The outside environment can now enter into the body. And guess what is the closest thing right there? The blood vessels, which were bringing red cells near the air so oxygen and CO2 can exchange with each other. And I say, then what happens? Well, the viruses cause the destruction of the lining, but the destruction of the lining opens the system to further infection. So viruses that were reproduced in that dying epithelial cell, some of them go in, some of them go out. The ones that go out in your respiration. So when you breathe, you release viruses. But some of the viruses go in when the lining got opened up. And then what? Well, now that you opened up the lining, not only did viruses go in, but bacteria and other agents that are in the air can now also go into the body. So now there's a second part of the problem. The first part was I destroy the lining cells with the virus, COVID virus. The second part of the problem is now that the lining cells are destroyed, I've opened the doorway for invasive organisms to come in and take over the system. And that's where respiratory distress comes from. I go, well, what's respiratory distress? Breathing becomes difficult. I go, how come breathing is difficult? Go back to the original story. The alveoli, the bubbles are like balloons. They expand when you breathe in and they contract when you breathe out. But I said, but when the lining cells of the alveolus come off, the fluid in the body, remember the aquarium? The fluid of the aquarium starts to come out, and what does it do? Fills up the balloon with fluid. I go, why is there a problem? I say, air is supposed to be in the balloon so that the air can transfer oxygen and CO2. But when the alveoli become with fluid, air can't get in there. And I say, what's the consequence? You can't get fresh oxygen because the air can't go through all the water to bring oxygen into the blood. And all of a sudden you have to breathe harder, distress, respiration. And the more the infection takes place, the more the fluid comes into the alveoli, the less you're able to breathe. And there's a point where if you can't get enough oxygen in the system, it leads to death. That basically what it's doing is it's attacking the lining cells, allowing the reproduction of the viruses, but simultaneously causing the lining cells to break down, opening the body to the outside expression of organisms coming in. And a secondary consequence of COVID is now the infection that has taken place because the barrier lining has broken down. So COVID didn't kill you directly, but COVID can lead to a worse situation involving failures of respiration and increased infections. Those are the elements that become lethal. So then I say, well, what about the immune system? And I go, well, the job of the immune system is to I identify those cells that are infected with viruses and kill them before the viruses can reproduce. And if the immune system gets ahead of the game, it can keep killing any infected cell, replacing it with a normal cell before the viruses have a chance to replicate. So that's when the immune system is working. What if you compromise the immune system? I said, what do you mean? What if you have something else going on that is demanding out of the immune system a lot of function? And then you get an infection. I said, well, now the immune system can't work up to its full capability because you're subdividing its effort. So when we have a chronic illness, for example, a chronic illness is debilitating the immune system. Why? It's using it to fight cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, whatever else is going wrong in the system. Now COVID comes in, I'm compromised, I don't have a full active immune system to fight the COVID, and as a result, the COVID can start to reproduce faster than my immune system can keep up with it because of the compromised influence. And then all of a sudden, well, how is this going to work out? Well, it's a race. It's a race between the virus replicating, causing more damage, and a race between the immune system capable of tooling up to fight that infection, to stop it before it overtakes the system. Why is the COVID such a big problem? Well, number one, because we don't have an immunological memory of an earlier infection by this particular virus. So that means we're not prepared if this virus shows up to deal with it. We have no previous experience. So everyone is essentially now a person that can get COVID because we don't have an immunological memory. So this is the big problem. But part two is, yes, I can get the infection, but now the outcome is based on, is my immune system compromised? Older people in nursing homes are already compromised. People with chronic diseases, in fact, in the United States, 40% of the population has 2 or more chronic diseases that interfere with the function of the immune system and compromise it. The lethality in the United States is different than other places because we are not in harmony to support our immune system. So now what we're facing is a virus that hasn't been around. Everybody is susceptible to the virus because it hasn't been around, so there's no previous immunological memory. When this first came, the number of cases that were affected were so many that they put a stress on the healthcare system, where the system couldn't keep up with the number of people being infected by the COVID virus. Then there was an idea. What if we have a lockdown and take all the people and put them away? And that way we would slow down the pace of the COVID infection, giving the healthcare system an opportunity to catch up. But then there was some idea that now that that lockdown group has been put out of commission, in a sense separate from the COVID virus infection, you think, well, does that protect them because they've been in lockdown? I go, no, they just don't get to see the virus. And I go, well, what's the consequence? I said, the virus didn't go away because people went into lockdown. So what would you expect to happen when you open up the doors and let people come back out? Of course, there would be another spike. Why? The virus is still here, and here's a whole fresh population that's never even been exposed to it. And we are now in that second spike. Does it mean the virus is more virulent? I said you just kept the susceptible people out of the picture and then reintroduced them again. And so the second spike is not a surprise. It is an anticipation. What is the problem? I said the race between the virus replicating and the immune system capable of catching up is based on how can I increase the effectiveness of the immune system to get ahead of the virus and shut it off? And the answer is, well, there are 4 fundamental things to enhance your immune system. And these 4 fundamental things, number 1, include providing nutrition. The immune system uses so much energy that out of your nutrition, if you are sick, most of that energy is going into the immune system function. So therefore, it becomes incumbent upon us to make sure we have proper nutrition that feeds us, and that means eating really healthy, organic, natural food, and not industrial farm food, which itself is toxic. Number 2, today's foods don't provide us with all the vitamins and supplements necessary to maintain a healthy body. So, in addition to eating well, then taking supplements such as vitamin C enhances the effectiveness of the immune system. Vitamin D enhances the effectiveness of the immune system. Interesting, human populations, especially in the States, are very low in those two vitamins. Without them, we are compromising the immune system, so taking vitamins and supplements adds to our health. Thirdly, exercise. You go, why? Because exercise is moving the blood, oxygenating it, moving things around, cleaning the lymph of the body, filtering out things, which is different than a sedentary person. The movement of the body is facilitating the movement of the circulatory system and the lymphatic system, and especially the immune system. And then the most important thing we must understand in enhancing the immune system, and that is stress hormones shut down the immune system. Now that sounds like punishment, and I go, no. It's actually an intelligent part of the system. If you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and you have an infection, remember, the amount of energy used by the immune system is so great that when many people get sick, they don't even have the energy to get out of bed. So the relevance about all this is we don't want stress hormones in there, because the function of the stress hormones is to conserve energy to run away from a saber-toothed tiger by shutting off functions not necessary to escape the tiger. And that means shutting down the immune system. Stress hormones are so effective at shutting down the immune system that medical practitioners use stress hormones when they transplant a foreign organ from a donor into recipient. They give the recipient stress hormones. Why? To shut down the immune system to protect the newly transplanted foreign organ. So, my goodness, the effectiveness of stress in shutting off the immune system, it's used therapeutically. What's the point? Watch the news. Go on the internet, read the stories. Just start looking out your window and see all the crazy stress-provoking things going on. I say, that itself is increasing the virulence of the COVID, because the stress is preventing the immune system from fully functioning. And these are the 4 elements that will help you. And I say, well, how effective is it? And I say, up to 80% of the people are infected, but don't really show the symptoms. A mild fever, nothing serious. Only a smaller percentage are serious. I say, what's the difference? The large group, their immune systems are intact. Eating well, taking vitamins and supplements, exercising, and being free of stress means that they can be infected by the COVID virus and not have any real adverse effects that would cause them to go see a doctor or go to a hospital. The small percentage that is affected, the reason they're affected and having a negative consequence is their immune system is not working up to full capacity. They are compromised. While 40% of the American population have 2 chronic illnesses that compromise the immune system, 60% of the American population have at least 1 chronic illness, so up to 60% of Americans are already compromised in their ability to withstand this infection. And when you are in a state of health, this infection is so minor that many people didn't even know they were infected. The high death rate, yes it is, but that's not a reflection of the virulence of the COVID as much as it is a reflection of the compromised health systems of those infected. In conclusion, the fear that has been motivated by the media that this is so deadly is not accurate. It's really affecting those people who are compromised. And if we make efforts on our part to take care of our immune system, then we will not be subjected to the virulent activity that could lead to death in those people that are compromised. We are capable of having a strength to resist the influence of the COVID virus.